love this venue, and I really love this microphone.
It's friendly. It looks friendly, right?
So, great, thanks. Oh, and the fan too. I noticed when Ron was up here, his hair was blowing cinematically, dramatically. This red, and I thought it's so great that they have this thing happening, for the poets. It was off for me.
It was off for me.
But I think Gene had it too, and I thought it was great. A couple times when Gene was reading, especially, there was some noise from downstairs, and I was thinking, wow, that's kind of distracting. And then Colin came over in the break, and he reminded me that he and I once read together somewhere in Ottawa. I don't remember the name of the bar. Really big bar. We were reading at the back, and it was a small gathering of poets. The poets were outnumbered, but not by much. And on the other side of the bar, people were playing pool and watching a boxing match. It was the world heavyweight championship. It was Tyson and Holyfield, the world heavyweight championship. Now, those of you who know what happened in that fight know where this story is going. So I'm reading a quiet, tender love sonnet or something like that, and suddenly from the back there's this crazed screaming, and I knew there was a boxing match going on, and I thought, my God, one of the boxers has been killed. And the screaming continued while I tried to read over it, and finally I went back and found, those of you who don't know, Mike Tyson bit Evander Holyfield's ear off in the fight, so that's why the people were screaming. So this is the thing, this is what we're up against as poets. Trying to compete against the popular culture where anything can happen. I mean, I noticed that they're selling drones at Staples, and that Vladimir Putin's Minister of War is a Buddhist. So these are two wildly surreal facts I've noticed in the last few days. It means that there's no use in our writing satire anymore. We might as well be writing poetry. I'm going to read that Drunk Judgment poem for sure. So. I wasn't going to, but I will. But first, I want to quote a poem. I'm recovering still from this workshop that Ian and I were helping to facilitate in Westport, not far from here. Cecilia was there as well, participating. And I did a workshop on writing as reenaction, as I call it, just about ways to make the poem acoustically and orthographically and punctuationally, you could say that. Reenact, recapitulate what you're describing in the poem, so it's not just reportage. And I quoted this wonderful translation of an old Japanese poem that I think does it perfectly, where the vowels get shorter and tighter, and then they get wider and more open, depending on the mood of the speaker, who is a hilariously curmudgeonly Zen abbot in the 14th century. This Zen abbot, Ikkyu, wrote the poem, and an Englishman named Graham Wilson, who I haven't been able to track down on the internet, he translated it and published this translation in Prism magazine in 1991. It's gorgeous, a gorgeous translation, and he totally reenacted what the Zen abbot was saying. So here it is. If nobody calls, I'm glad. And if they do, irked, that they blunt the edge of my loneliness, of my watching flowers fade and the slow winds strew untrodden pathways red. What politesse, what Zen refinements you would look to find to reward your soul for its slog to this awful place. Well, you got it wrong. My 100-flowered mind blooms for itself behind this fuck-off face. Nice, hard Anglo-Saxon syllables. This poem is called Drunk Judgment. I think the speaker is judging himself more than others, but still, maybe.
Just as long as it's not me, we're good.
Yeah. So it's called Drunk Judgment, A Night Address, subtitled A Night Address. It's from a book called The Address Book, which is a book of addresses to other people. The world is wasted on you. Show us one clear time beyond childhood or the bottle you spent your whole self, hoarding no blood bank backup, some future aim to fuel. Or let yourself look foolish in reckless style on bar stool, back street, or dance floor, without a dim image of your hamming hobbling you the whole while. Voyeur to your own couplings, you never did come with them, did you? Even when you did. You said hell is details, when hell was just a cave, the concave mirrored skull you dwelt inside, your left hand polishing while the other shook to clinch a deal. Provide, provide. Sure, in the end, like any soul, you were endless and yet brave, deft with phrases, kind. 3 cheers for you. Too close to want what others love, you vetoed life. Were there other worlds to crave? I put together a book of sort of short essays and mainly epigrams, which I call memos. It's called Workbook. I think I was just talking to, was it Mike in the back? He said he's looking at them, so some of them look like they could have been essays. Well, they should have been essays. These were notes for essays I wanted to write, but I was too lazy to write them. So instead of building these ideas up into essays, I boiled them down into epigrams, which had the additional virtue is of I didn't have to present a rounded point of view. I could say something that was provocative and in fact completely wrong, and it didn't matter because it's only an epigram. It's meant as a provocation. So one section is called On Poetry. So here are a few of the memos from On Poetry. Small print. We gotta get the reading glasses too. On Poetry. 1. Poetry, the art of calling things by their true and secret names. 2. So that Mandelstam, in his famous sonnet Leningrad, shows us that his childhood city answers in imagination to an older, effaced name, Petersburg, which in fact it now has again. 3. Every time we use the wrong word, the world slips farther out of focus and reach. 4. The world may not need poets, but the earth does. The earth needs poets to substantiate it lyrically, redeem it from its current invisibility, make it again tangible to a human world that's decimating nature or in flight from it, hiding inside hard drives, the web, and other digital habitats. 5. Poetry demands a language not only stripped of cliché, that hoary guideline, but also stripped of commercial valence. Contemporary discourse is shot through with the phrasing and attitudes of merchandising. Slogans become idioms, brand names become nouns or verbs. Commercial attitudes end up contaminating the culture and conscripting our behavior and speech. Poetry is a precinct where such language can still be recognized as barbaric and ephemeral. On the other hand, I sometimes like poems that use brand names and so on, so, go figure. As I said, it's just a provocation. 8. Purpose of formal constraints, if you use them, as in Drunk Judgment, which is a rhyme poem, not to show off or to establish an allegiance with supposedly reactionary traditionalists or supposedly avant-garde Olympians, but simply to compress and intensify your material. 9. Poetry is not the way we talk or even write off the cuff, but the way we always would talk if we could at significant moments. 9b, poetry as the ultimate condition that speech and writing aspire to. I'll skip right to the very last one, number 12. No mainstream in poetry, everyone marginal. No fat cats, no free riders, no lounging elite. And yet these puerile gang wars. Experimental poets consider lyric poets mainstream and call formalists retrograde, reactionary. Lyric-free versers call both formalists and experimentalists academic. The formalists, too, call lyric poets mainstream and call the experimentalists ... You're right, this is boring. Just read the work and love whatever feels alive, whatever jolts you into new frames of feeling and thought. So why don't I follow that up with an actual rhyme poem? I don't do many of them perfect rhymes, or no, slam rhymes, I guess. In ballad meter. Ballad of the Slow Road. The slow road is the route for you, though you'd hope for smoother, quicker. To skip the Chilkoot, cruise the freeway. False hope is a fast talker. Long's the lone road worth the going, though the work might seem for ashes, as years compound and all that accrues are exponential wishes. But to look your hunger in the eye, to stare it straight to zero, and then to learn to love the weight till the love is in your marrow. and the wait is no delay, but more a seasoning of the will. At no one's pace but yours, your trail, and your own shoes to fill. You know, I realize that going from not wearing the reading glasses to wearing them is much easier than going the other way, because suddenly you can't see anything. Like I had to more or less quote. I think I'm going to do a new one. Those of you who are in the front row are already starting to panic. Don't worry, these are just drafts. It's not actually very long. There's a kind of melancholy story that goes with this poem. You were talking about The Savage God, Alvarez's book. It's a really fantastic book. He knew and found Sylvia Plath. I wanted to write about, almost a year ago, my now 19-year-old daughter and I found a man who had killed himself with a shotgun, which was a grim occasion. I wanted to find, so I followed up on the man's life. I went to his memorial service and wished that I'd gotten to play hockey with him. One of the things that sent him into a spiral was he couldn't play anymore because of joint problems, and that was the thing he'd done that he really loved that kept him going despite some problems in his life. This poem is not about him in any way, and yet it grows. This guy was in the military, but it certainly grows out of finding that. You know, a lot of poems grow out of two things that somehow converge. It was finding this man and finding out about his life, and then wanting to write something about Afghanistan veterans and about something I was saying to a dear friend very recently, that the tragic thing about wars, like the interventions when we go over and get involved in Iraq or Afghanistan, not only are people killed immediately, civilians as well as soldiers, but generations after, 2 or 3 generations later, people are still struggling. Families are struggling because the men bring home the things they saw. Men and women now bring home the things they saw. They pass it on to their wives, and children pass it on. Anyway, this is a kind of prose poem called Clinical Notes of a Bipolar Therapist. And there are 3 voices in the poem. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to tell who's speaking. It's easier if you read it because there's some stuff italicized to distinguish the voices, but probably you will. It's more about the psychiatrist who bears the pain of the patient in this case. So, Clinical Notes of the Bipolar Therapist. Oh, does everyone know what Calvados is? That wonderful apple brandy? Awesome stuff. 1. The Calvados by lamplight is an oily gold, a liquor pressed from bullion. Taste the quintessence of Norman summers, the fruit-sweetening sun, salt-bearing breezes of the English Channel, flotillas of cloud cooling the coastline. Proustian autumns, mellow and rich, the windless weeks of the apple harvest. Your snifter, brimming with brandy, exhales the scent of ancient orchards. 2. With your patient, you are driving a dog sled over a frozen sea under a sky trembling and teeming with a crimson aurora, like blood pouring down a dark face. Your patient yells and whips the team onward. A bitch is whelping as she runs, dropping raw, mouse-sized pups onto the ice. The other dogs scoop them up and swallow them without breaking pace. You surge north toward that bloody sky and, you are sure, open water. 3. The drink's mission is to italicize the effect of several dozen tranquilizers while masking their aftertaste. You arrange the Celestinox 7.5 milligram on the edge of your desk in neat formation, like a cycle of birth control pills. This really ought to do it. You swallow them, and you swallow another full snifter of Calvados, and taste again those schoolboy summers at your grandparents' orchard near Saint-Valentin. 4. The ones coming back from the war are the worst. You listen and prescribe rest cure, work cure drugs. You'd rather not prescribe them, but you must. Even dust degrades to finer dust. We find you slumped at your desk in a pool of your own sad fluids, and we revive you, pump your stomach, and your body survives. Bodies are made to, mine's not so much. The ones that come back from the war, and so on. Even dust falls to finer dust. 5. Your patient grew up in northern Quebec, son of a white trapper and an Inuit mother. At 20, he saw the war as a way out. So it was. Up there, everyone knew how to use a shotgun, Pete said, because of the fucking bears, though he never had to kill one. He did waste a guy in Panjway with his C7, and it wasn't like online. Wasn't even a man. Wouldn't a man over there have a beard? Yes, I fear so. Doctor, feel, but don't overfeel. 6. Above all, don't get too involved. You can care, but you must not love. Up north, when a big tide went out, they could crawl, then walk under the ice, and it was alcohol blue, and they could hear the sea in the far off, and sorrels tramping above. Pete kept coming back to that, curled like a glove in his chair. Many came home like him, but not all kept shotguns ready. When the tide returns, man, you gotta move fast. Doctor, I order you not to love.